In 2024, Ahrefs made an estimated $149 million in revenue. No venture capital, no classic sales-led machine, no long-running free trials, no active affiliate program, no discounts. And paid ads were never at the center of the growth engine. And yet, Ahrefs became a billion-dollar scale company not just by avoiding a few of the standard playbook moves marketers are thought to copy, they avoided almost all of them, and they did it on purpose. Ahrefs' own CMO once said something that sounds almost ridiculous coming from a marketing software company. And I want you to really sit with this. He said, "Don't go to our company website, search for us on YouTube." A marketing software company telling you to skip the company website. That is either the most confident thing I've ever heard a CMO say, or it is the clue that unlocks how this whole thing actually works. I think it's both, because the real Ahrefs story is not that they avoided paid ads. Any company can avoid paid ads. That doesn't make you strategic. Sometimes it just makes you invisible. The real story is that Ahrefs built something strong enough to make paid acquisition less necessary. And the strangest part is that that thing was not built by the marketing team. Most people who know Ahrefs know the surface story. Ahrefs is a tool for SEO professionals. Marketers use it to check backlinks, research keywords, track rankings, audit websites, and analyze competitors. It is not a consumer product. It is not a household name, and it's definitely not the kind of company your parents have heard of. And yet, some of the world's leading companies, Huffington Post, Expedia, LinkedIn, Shopify, SurveyMonkey, are all listed by Ahrefs as company with marketers using their product. Without Ahrefs being built around a traditional sales machine. The company was founded in 2010 by Ukrainian software engineer Dmitry Gerasimenko. He bootstrapped it in Singapore with roughly $300,000 of his own money. No co-founders from prestigious universities, no venture capital investment, no demo days, and no pitch decks. He's just a founder who went after a very expensive problem, which is essentially a crawler aimed at structuring a huge piece of the internet well enough so that marketers will pay to see what they found. Within a year, it was profitable. By 2016, according to Latka, it was making $12 million in revenue per year. By 2023, $100 million. And by 2024, an estimated $149 million. Every year investors came, every year Gerasimenko said no. And here's the part that often gets skipped entirely. The reason he could keep saying no is not just discipline or philosophy. It is something structural, something built into the company before most people had even heard of it. But before we get there, I want to show you what Ahrefs built on the surface, because the education system they developed is genuinely unlike anything else in B2B software. And understanding it is the first step to understanding why this whole thing works. Tim Solo joined Ahrefs in 2015. He was employee number 16, the first dedicated marketer the company had ever hired. And by that point, Ahrefs already had traction. Keep that detail in mind because it matters a lot for our story. Because in most marketing case studies, the marketer arrives as the hero. The company is obscure, the strategy changes, the growth begins. Nice, clean story. But Ahrefs is messier than that, and actually more interesting. Because Team Solo didn't create the conditions that made Ahrefs' growth model possible, he was the one who recognized them. Before the content strategy, there was the product. Before the YouTube channel, there was the crawler. Before the blog became a machine, there was the data. That sequence is crucial because Ahrefs was not a weak product looking for a strong marketing strategy. It was a strong product looking for the right public surface. And Solo's genius was understanding what that product could do in public, which is not to sell itself, but to prove itself. That is different. Here's how the Ahrefs content machine works at its best. Someone searches on Google how to get more backlinks. They land on an Ahrefs article. The article teaches them, and I actually mean teaches them, how backlink building actually works, step by step, with examples, with data. And then, naturally, woven into every step is Ahrefs. Here's how you find backlink opportunities. Here's what the data looks like inside the tool. Here's the competitor gap. Here's the keyword you missed. And here's the report you would run. The product is not inserted like an ad, it is demonstrated like a tool on a workbench. This is why it doesn't feel as salesy as most SaaS content. Because the reader is not being told, trust us, the reader is being shown to look. And look is much stronger than someone saying, believe me, especially for technical buyers. Solo described this idea in a very simple way. He said, the first time people use your product is in their heads. Before they sign up, before they pay, before they talk to anyone, they have already imagined themselves using the product. They have already mentally solved their problem with it. By the time they reach the pricing page, the decision is mostly made. This is why the search on us on YouTube line is so revealing. The YouTube channel is not a marketing channel, or at least not in the way most people think of marketing channels. It is a product demonstration running continuously at scale without a salesperson needing to book a call. And here's what makes this system genuinely hard to copy. It is not the content strategy itself. Any company can decide to publish educational content. Thousands of them do, most of it does not work. Companies see the content, but they do not see the conditions that make the content credible. They see the tutorial. They do not see the data infrastructure inside the tutorial. They see the blog post. They do not see the product truth that makes the blog post convert. They see the YouTube channel. They do not see the years of crawling, indexing, engineering, and product decisions that make the demonstration feel real. Ahrefs marketing worked because it did not behave like persuasion. It behaved like evidence. The data feels fresh, comprehensive, and useful enough that the product becomes part of the education. That data advantage is not a marketing decision, it is an engineering decision made in 2010, before Tim Solo arrived, before there was a content strategy, before there was even a marketing team. And this is where the story moves out of marketing completely. Ahrefs bot is the crawler that powers Ahrefs data. According to Ahrefs, it is the most active crawler in the SEO category, and the 8th most active crawler after Google's and Bing's crawlers. It visits over 8 billion pages every 24 hours. It updates its index every 15 to 30 minutes, and it has been running continuously since 2010. 16 years of uninterrupted crawling and 16 years of accumulated data. That is the actual moat. Not the content, not the brand, not the educational videos, the data. And here's the thing most people don't know about how that data is stored and processed, because this is the detail that changes how you understand everything else about this company. In 2020, Ahrefs ran a calculation. What would it cost to run our infrastructure on Amazon Web Services, the cloud platform that most software companies use because it is convenient, scalable, and fast to deploy? The answer was almost absurd. To run their 850 servers on AWS over a 2.5-year period would cost roughly $447 million. Their actual cost for the same period running their own servers in a co-location data center in Singapore, $39.5 million. The difference is $408 million. Now, there is a caveat here. The comparison is not perfectly apples to apples. The Register pointed out that Ahrefs' AWS estimate involved assumptions around equivalent servers configurations, networking costs, and cloud pricing. So, this is not a universal argument that every software company should avoid the cloud. That would be too simple. But even with that caveat, the point still holds. For Ahrefs' workload, owning more of the infrastructure changed the economics of the company. Efim Mirochnik, who runs data center operations at Ahrefs, put it very directly. He said, and I'm quoting directly here, Ahrefs would not be profitable or even exist if our product were 100% on AWS. Read that again. Would not exist. So, now this video is no longer about content. Most people talk about Ahrefs as a marketing case study. They talk about the content strategy. They talk about product-led growth. They talk about Team Solo and educational content. And all of that is very real. But underneath it, load-bearing is an infrastructure decision that saved hundreds of millions of dollars. So, why does this matter? Most software companies that want to grow fast take venture capital. Venture capital buys speed, paid acquisition, sales teams, aggressive discounting, the whole conventional playbook. But capital also changes pressure. It changes timelines. Ahrefs never needed that capital in the same way because the company was profitable very early. And one reason it could stay profitable was that the infrastructure was engineered to be radically cheaper than the industry default, which meant the margins were high enough to fund the content operation internally, which meant the content could be built slowly and properly without the pressure of a quarterly growth target demanding faster results, which meant the education ecosystem had time to compound. The content strategy did not create the business model. The business model made the content strategy possible. And the business model was not a marketing decision. It was an engineering decision made by a founder who had been thinking about web crawlers and data infrastructure since he was a student. Gerasimenko has described his philosophy to investors in terms that most startup founders would find uncomfortable. He has said that taking VC money is like taking the elevator instead of climbing the stairs. And the ticket is paid for with your equity, your control, and what he believes are your actual chances of building something lasting. He climbed the stairs for 16 years. And the infrastructure he built on the way up is part of the reason the company does not need to spend like a conventional SaaS company to acquire customers like a conventional SaaS company. There is one more layer that makes Ahrefs much more interesting. And I would not overstate it because it is very possible that this part of the story does not become commercially successful. But it reveals something important about how the company thinks. In 2019, Ahrefs announced they were building a search engine. Not to compete with Google in search quality, but to challenge the economics of search. The search engine is called Yep, and Ahrefs has invested 60 million of its own capital into this project. Yep's proposed model was to give 90% of ad revenue to content creators whose work appears in search results, while Ahrefs keeps 10%. Now, there are obvious problems here. Competing with Google is not like launching another SaaS feature. Distribution is brutal. User behavior is sticky. Search quality is subjectively and objectively very, very hard. But whether Yeps succeeds or fails is almost beside the point. What it tells you is something important about the company's philosophy. Ahrefs does not seem to think only in terms of attention capture. It measures success by whether the infrastructure it builds creates value for the people inside the ecosystem. That philosophy is the thread running through every decision we have looked at. The infrastructure over cloud convenience, the education over advertising, the slow compounding over fast growth, the 90% to creators over keeping it all themselves, these are not random decisions. They all point in the same direction. So let me bring this back to the question we opened with. How does a company that sells marketing software build a billion-dollar scale business without playing the paid ads game? The answer most people give when they study Ahrefs is great content strategy, publish educational videos, build a blog that ranks, teach people how to do SEO. Let the product sell itself. And that answer is not wrong, but it is incomplete. Because what the content strategy explanation misses is the sequence. Gerasimenko did not start by asking, what is our marketing strategy? He built a crawler first, then a data index. Then he refused investors because the margins were good enough to say no. Then he built his own servers because the cloud would have made those margins harder to sustain. Then, and only then, did he hire Team Solo, who built a public education system that made the product visible. That is the sequence. Team Solo did not create the conditions that made Ahrefs' growth model possible. He arrived after the conditions already existed. What he did, and this is actually very important, is that he recognized what those conditions allowed. This is why the Ahrefs story is so often copied badly. People copy the visible part, they copy the blog, the video format, the product screenshots, the keywords, the teach don't sell tone, but they cannot copy the internal sequence that made the strategy possible. Solo once said, "We don't have a sales team. We don't do any product demos. We don't do any sales calls. People discover our content by searching for it on Google or YouTube." That is not a boast about their content. It is a description of what happens when the product and the education are so completely integrated that the distinction between them stops making sense. Ahrefs did not win because it avoided marketing. It won because the marketing was the last decision, not the first. The product made the content useful. The data made the product believable. The infrastructure made the margins possible. The margins made the independence possible. Independence made patience possible. The patience made the compounding possible. And compounding made paid acquisition less central to the business. That is very different from saying, do not run ads. Because ads are not the enemy. Sometimes ads are exactly what a good company should use. The real question is, what are ads carrying? Are they amplifying something true or compensating for something weak? That is where this story becomes useful beyond Ahrefs. Because most companies think their marketing problem starts in marketing. They think they need a better channel, a better funnel, a better campaign, a better conversion rate, a better content calendar. And sometimes they do. But often, the marketing problem started much earlier, in the product, in the cost structure, in the pricing, in the buyer's trust, in the margin model, in the pressure created by how the company was founded, in the decision to optimize for speed before the company had built enough proof. Marketing is rarely just marketing. It is usually the visible expression of earlier business decisions. So, if you run a business or you're thinking about building one, I think the useful question is not, should I stop running ads? And it is not, should I copy Ahrefs' content strategy? The useful question is, what decision am I making right now at the product, pricing, margin, and infrastructure level that are either opening or closing your options at the marketing level later? Because most companies arrive at their marketing strategy the way you arrive at a traffic jam. You do not choose it directly, you just kept driving and eventually there was nowhere else to go. Ahrefs is interesting not because Team Solo is a brilliant marketer, though by any measure he is, but because Dmitry Gerasimenko built a company where the brilliant marketing was almost inevitable. He built a company where the upstream decisions opened downstream options. Product depth opened the education option. Data quality opened the proof option. Infrastructure opened the margin option. Independence opened the patience option. And all of that together made paid acquisition less necessary than it would be for a more conventional company. That is the real lesson. Not content beats ads, not bootstrapping beats VC, not engineering beats marketing. The lesson is that growth strategies do not exist in isolation. They are downstream of how the company is built. If you have seen this inside a company, I would genuinely like to hear about it, especially if you have worked on a product where the content strategy failed because the product couldn't carry the proof, or the opposite. A product that was strong, but the company never figured out how to turn that strength into public trust. And if this is the kind of investigation you want more of, companies that broke the rules, the structural reason behind it, and what it actually means for the decisions you are making, subscribe. I will see you in the next one.